think we can probably get started now. So, hi everyone, and welcome to today's discovery session. These sessions are meant to support students, researchers, and industry with an understanding of how to use data and artificial intelligence. Before we get started, I would like to begin by acknowledging that DeepSense works out of Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and this territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. So I would like to acknowledge the Indigenous people whose traditional land we are on today and ask that everyone take a moment to consider the territory in which they are situated in, as well as their own personal responsibility in the processes of reconciliation. My name is Brogan, and I'm the Senior Communication Specialist at DeepSense. For those of you who don't know, DeepSense is an organization based out of the Faculty of Computer Science at Dalhousie University, whose mission is to help grow the economy with artificial intelligence. DeepSense rapidly delivers industry-ready applied AI solutions that improve efficiency, boost productivity, and unlock new opportunities for growth. And our projects equip companies with advanced AI capabilities while giving students hands-on experience solving complex real-world problems. So if you're looking to expand your skills, work on real-world projects, and gain valuable industry experience, be sure to submit your information to our student pool. So now for today's session, it's led by Michael Jacko, and Michael studied physics and computer science at Dalhousie University. After graduation, he went on to work for the Applied Energy Research Lab building battery modeling software at NCSS. And for the past 3 years, Michael has been working at GIT Coatings in the Vessel Performance Department. He is the lead data scientist, leading the technical side of the department, building tooling and models that help understand how vessels can improve their operational efficiency. And in his spare time, he likes to work with AI, automate things, capture data, and gain useful insights from it. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, we'll take them at the end, but feel free to drop them in the chat at any point. And that's enough from me, so I'll pass it over to Michael.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brogan, for the introduction. My name is Michael Jacko. Some of you in the audience today might know me from my work at GIT Coatings. Some of you might know me from Squash. But today I'm going to be talking about something completely different. So today I'm going to talk about a website that I made called Gateway Mealprep. Here. So a bit about who I am first. I was born in Guelph, Ontario. I moved to Halifax in 2017 to study physics and computer science at Dalhousie. Graduated in 2022. I've sort of always been interested in computer stuff and tinkering around with computers. I like to say that my first aha moment was setting up a server to play Minecraft with my friends. This was back in the day before you could really do that easily. And I remember, wanting to do this and working on it for weeks on end, and finally, seeing my friend's name pop up, and like saying that they joined the server and knowing that it worked, and that was really that was the carrot on a stick type of thing that really got me motivated to be like, okay, I want to do something here. I know I want to like work in this field. So I've really been sort of chasing that moment ever since. A lot of these sort of side hustles and side projects have I like to think that they've stemmed from that moment. Like Brogan said, I worked at the Applied Energy Research Lab at NSCC, worked on some demand reduction modeling there for a commercial demand reduction program to essentially see whether or not you could use small scale batteries to subsidize power usage for commercial buildings in Nova Scotia. Really interesting project. Worked there for about 2 years. After that, I got hired at GIT as a data analytics intern, and I've been working there ever since. So I'm working there currently as their data science lead. GIT Coatings, for those of you who don't know, is a company that produces a special type of paint that goes on the hull and propeller of vessels, prevents fouling from growing on without the use of biocides, which are conventionally used in the industry, special poisons that are embedded into the paint. We have a paint that doesn't, leach any biocides. So that's a bit about me. Going into the idea for this site, really the idea was, take what's on sale at a grocery store and build out a meal plan based off of those sale items. So the idea is that if you can do that, you essentially get a set of meals that are cheap, that are affordable, that are easy to make, and it sort of takes the mental anguish out of like figuring out what to make for the week. It's a tough thing to do without language models, but ChatGPT gets released in 2020. Language models make this technically possible, although not really in 2020. They don't really have the intelligence to even be able to make a recipe. And I wanted to do something like this, and I sort of needed a candidate store to test this on. So Gateway Meat Market seemed like the obvious choice. It's an awesome grocery store. I'll go into a little bit. So for those of you who don't know, Gateway Meat Market is a grocery store in Dartmouth slash Cole Harbour. It's locally owned and operated. It really is the best grocery store. If you've never been, it's definitely worth the trek. It's a bit far from Halifax. You kind of need to drive out there, but I guarantee you it's worth it. They have a flyer that comes out every Wednesday, and they consistently have really, really good deals for everything. It started as a butcher or like they just sold meat essentially initially. But they've since expanded a bunch of different times. They had one massive expansion this summer where they, don't quote me on this, but I think they like quadrupled their floor space. So it's lots of more space to walk around in the store and get your groceries. And now they sell a lot of different things. They sell produce, they sell meat, they have some grocery items as well. Really, really insanely good deals. When you go to Gateway and you get your receipt, they tell you at the bottom how much you've saved. And it's usually like 50% of your total like spend at the store is saved compared to a conventional grocery store. So really can't speak highly enough about this store. Definitely go and take a look at this grocery store if you haven't had the chance already. So I'm going to start with talking about the eras of this because, I've been working on this for over a year now, and it's gone through different eras. It's gone through different levels of sophistication over time. Era zero was really just the idea. So this was me by myself just taking the Gateway flyer, feeding it into ChatGPT, and saying like, what can I make? What meals can I make with what's on sale this week? The cool thing with that is that it has the prices there, so you can, get an idea of how much the meal's going to cost. And I found myself doing this week over week. And, for my job, I automate things, and also on my spare time, I automate things. So I thought, you know what? If I'm going to be doing this, every week, might as well do something to make this like an automatic recurring thing, so I don't have to manually copy and paste the flyer into ChatGPT every single time. So that kind of gets us to era one, which is so it's no longer me going to the ChatGPT web interface and getting the recipe from there. This is me feeding in the flyer to an API to get essentially to create an HTML file that is the basis of this site. So this era was really, really bad. And you'll see I have it on the next slide, an example of what this used to look like. The page would look different every single week because essentially what I'm doing is I crafted a system prompt that essentially instructed it to, make this HTML site, have the initial part talk about like what's on sale this week, and then have all the subsequent be like a few recipes that I could make. Um, it was, because the language model is making the entire HTML file, although I'm trying to style it consistently with a system prompt saying, use a red header, use like a cozy theme, it looks similar every single time, but it's different. And it's really not how you want to build something like this, right? Because you want to have the language model focus on doing what you need the generative AI for, right? Which is creating the recipes. You don't need the language model to shift its focus to creating the entire structure of the HTML, and also doing the calculation stuff itself, hard-ish math, especially with, back in the day, I was using GPT 3.5 Turbo. It really doesn't work. So this is what you end up getting if you try to do it this way. So you can sort of see that the language model is trying to style it consistently. Like it's got the red header. It's got, the initial part is having, is the sale items. And you've got the recipes that follow, but it's slightly different every single week, right? Like the colors are slightly different. It's highlighting things differently every week. So this is really not what you want. There's no styling at all. There's no embedded CSS or very, very little embedded CSS. Um, It's getting the icon. So this is a bit of a, surprise this actually worked. The icon here is a publicly hosted icon for the store that is just host online. You can go find a URL. So I literally fed that URL into the system prompt and I said, use this logo and have it in the header somewhere. And, I'm essentially relying on the language model feeding me back that URL in the right way to find this site. So at this point, this is still just an HTML file that's locally on my computer that I can click on, cool, whatever. But, I want to bring this to the masses. I want to spread this. So Era 2 was, okay, it's a mailing list now. So I figured out how to get Python to send emails. And I really went buck wild with a hard-coded list of emails. So some of you in the audience today might have been on this mailing list. I apologize if you were. It was annoying. Nobody likes a mailing list. But this was my first attempt at like bringing this to the masses. So essentially what I would do is I would take that HTML file and I would embed it in the email and I would send it out that way. This is a true thing too. Point three here is I could not for the life of me figure out how to make the send mail function take a list of emails and send it to all the recipients. And so what I ended up doing was I just put that method call in a loop and I fed in every email individually. So, this is what being a 10x developer, sort of looks like. It's a joke, haha, funny. So at this point, I'm in communication with Gateway, and they like the idea, they want to support it, but they're understandably asking where the link to this is. They want to go to a website and see this. They don't, it's not necessarily super valuable as a mailing list. So it kind of puts that idea in my head. I'm like, okay, that might be the next step here. So I add their email to the mailing list, and they're part of the recipients now. So that brings us to era 3. So, okay, now it's on cloudfront.net. I'm using AWS and it's live at this link. You can go to this, jumble of characters.cloudfront.net and you can see the page. So this is, also not that great because, this is really hard. You can imagine me going to Gateway and I would do this and I would try to communicate this to the cashiers and the people at Gateway. I said, I made this site, go check it out. It takes what's on sale every week and it builds recipes with it, but it's got really bad curb appeal, right? Like it's really, and I would do this, try to communicate, okay, they'd be like, okay, what's the URL? Okay, 23JH34F9. It doesn't stick. People don't remember it. So it's very, and if you've been to Gateway, especially before the renovation, very loud place, very, crowded. You're sort of shoulder to shoulder with people, very hard to communicate that. At this point too, I built in images. So the images, although they reflected what the meals were, they weren't great. They had this like high definition, like medieval comic book vibe to them, where everything was kind of glossy. I also had a weekly joke that the language model would produce every week alongside the recipes, and that was just really bad. At this point, this is still essentially like a year ago. Language models, the language model I was using anyway, we're not good at jokes. It would spit out the same joke every single week. Why did the donor refuse to leave Halifax? It couldn't bear to be wrapped up in anything but the local charm. What does that even mean? So that was a really bad idea. That was, just a kind of a shot in the dark for, I thought it could happen, so might as well, put it in. And the weekly joke below that too, why the donor refused to leave Halifax? It couldn't wrap its head around living anywhere else, right? Same sort of joke, but it's also kind of just cringy and bad. So that's era 3. Taking a pit stop into era 3.5. This is the Mac Mini M4 era, and this is a tragedy. Okay, so last Christmas I bought myself this little Mac Mini. I've got it sitting on my desk right here. That's a photo of it. To essentially run this background task. I also had a bunch of other sort of pipelines and stuff that I had running on this, but I essentially had the gateway site running on this locally with using Olama and Mistral. So if you've ever tried to automate something on Mac OS, you're using .plist files, you're using things like launch agents to schedule these tasks. But this is a tragedy because I fried this machine. So as a precautionary tale, if you want to do something like this, using palm temperature reading. So literally what I would do is I would just put my hand on it because it was operating headless. There was no screen attached to it. And I would test to see how hot the machine was over time. And this is not a good enough warning signal to see whether or not your system is failing. Essentially, what happened was that for like a week in a row, it was really hot when I touched it. And then eventually when I plugged the monitor in, I tried to start it up, I got a black screen. And I fried the motherboard. I went into Apple and, thank you to Apple, it was within the manufacturer warranty. These machines aren't supposed to die in 6 months. So they gave me a new one. And I really do want this to return. I like the idea of having something like this. For context, the whole system works on my desktop. And the desktop uses a lot of power, and I like the Mac Mini at its peak pulls like 40 watts of power. And it's super efficient, and I like that. And it just sits there and it runs everything in the background. So I do eventually want to have this return. I haven't fully hooked up everything on it yet, but that's sort of the Mac Mini era. It will return, hopefully. So Era 4 is sort of the launch of this for the first time. So I buy the domain gatewaymealprep.com. I get AdSense approved on it. So, this I'm paying for everything out of pocket here. So the AdSense helps with, supporting these recurring costs, the hosting, the language model usage. Um, and it goes really well. So Gateway finally has a link to point to, so they post it on their Facebook page, and the comments are awesome. Honestly, it's better than I expected. There were like 200 comments on the initial post, and they're all like this. It's all people saying, it's a great idea, thank you. A lot of people are thinking that Gateway made the site, which is understandable. We have Bonnie over here saying she's crying. We have Toby Tong saying, some really nice things. We got Emily Burke in the comments as well, being super kind. And this was the culmination of essentially all of the work. Kind of ended up with this point. It's finally live. Like we're at a one, like version 1.0, and people seem to really like it. So this was a great feeling to see this happen, and to see that people are actually using this site and find it interesting and find it useful. So we then go to Era 5. Better pictures. So you can see an example of the pictures at the bottom right. They're still not perfect. They're a bit uncanny, but they're way better than they were before. I'm going to Google for the images now. It's cheaper and it's just better quality overall. Got rid of the jokes because language models aren't funny. Um, the whole script, the whole website was run on one Python file called recipe2.py. So I did at this point a massive refactor, and I, got rid of recipe2.py, and I made it a lot more modular modular. So instead of me trying to change one thing and it breaking the rest of it, I am now able to kind of build this out and have a lot more creativity with how I'm able to sort of build this type of system out. So cautionary tale about Google auto experiments. When you have Google ads on your site, what they will do is they will run auto experiments, which means that essentially they show 50% of the people that visit your site a specific ad setup, and they'll show 50% of the people what you currently have. And I'm not sure exactly how it works, but the vibe that I got essentially was that whichever of those scenarios makes more money, it'll just auto apply that after the experiment's done. So that's what happened here, where essentially the experiment that they ran was essentially plastering the site with ads, and it broke the flow of the site entirely. It was really, they would put ads directly inside the recipe tiles, and it made it so you couldn't really tell what you were looking at. You didn't know what was an ad and what was not an ad. So if you have AdSense on your site, be careful about this. Google will do it automatically without telling you. This is resolved now. I sort of have fixed this, and like I'm very aware of Google running auto experiments on the site, but sort of a precautionary tale there. Or not Bonnie, sorry, Barbara had a great idea too. I wonder if the week's past meal prep will be archived on the site. Added that in as well. So there's a little drop down that you can go and see all the previous meals that were generated for the previous weeks. So this sort of brings us to today. So this is Era 6. I added a daily recipe. So you can go and look at a new recipe every single day using what's on sale. And I also ran out of my free tier of AWS, so that's not that great, but this is gonna happen. This is gonna happen eventually. So this is a snapshot of what the site looks like now. I encourage you to go on the site after to explore it and check it out for yourself. But essentially, every week when the flyer comes out, you get four different options for what you can make that week with what's on sale. There's a little sort of toggleable thing where you can choose how many portions you want, and it'll change all of the ingredients dynamically, and it'll change the price as well. There's nutritional information. There's the recipe below as well, and then above this, there's the daily recipe to look at as well. So that's essentially the end of the eras of Gateway, mealprep.com. Um, Now I'm going to go into some technical challenges slash product challenges that I had with making this type of site. So when you want to make a recipe with AI, it's actually pretty simple. You can just go to ChatGPT and you can say, make a recipe using these ingredients. And it'll give you a recipe, and especially with something like GPT-5, it's going to do a good job like 100% of the time. But that's far from having a site that does that for you essentially. So what you can do is you can also kind of tune the question to add, like have it do more useful things for you. So you can say things like make it vegetarian, specify how many portions. You can ask it to give you a vivid description and like a visual description of what the meal looks like. And then you can take that description and feed it into an image model and get a picture of what the meal looks like. If you feed in the ingredients and the costs of those, you can calculate the costs. And even if you don't have the costs, the language model is usually pretty good at estimating what the cost of the ingredients are. So you can get the cost per portion or per however many portions you want. And you can do things like getting the nutritional information as well. So when you build with language models, when you integrate a language model into your code, you almost 100% of the time are going to want to use something called structured outputs. Now, a structured output just means that instead of giving you a natural language output like on the left, you get something that is already in a JSON. So this is something that is like essential to building with language models, essentially. So, in the previous example at the top here, the output is just this natural language, something that like you can read as a human, it's useful, but it's really, really hard to build with it. Because what you have to end up doing is you have to build something that parses that output and extracts all the valuable information from it. So you have to build something, custom to say, okay, go find the name fields, then take the words after that, find the ingredients, put them in a list for me, find the instructions. It's really, really hard. Whereas if you have it spit it out as a JSON, you already have it structured. So you can just say, go to the name field, what's the name, find the ingredients list, it's right here. You don't need to build something custom to parse the output of the language model. Back in my day, we didn't structured outputs weren't a thing with all of the APIs. I remember initially building this, you didn't have the option to just have a structured output. Nowadays, essentially all language model API providers have some way to turn on structured outputs, where you define exactly what you want the output to be, and it'll adhere to it essentially 100% of the time. So we no longer have to deal with like, writing a piece of software to go parse the output of the language model. It's already in a way that's really easy to build into the rest of your software stack. Super useful if you're building with a language model. I'd argue that almost 100% of the time you're going to want to use structured outputs for whatever you're doing. So another technical challenge was having repeated recipes. So the point of the site is to have a novel recipe every day that you would actually want to try. And if you have, like, if you can imagine if the site had the exact same recipe every day, it's going to lead to a bad user experience. Nobody's really going to want to go on the site if it's the exact same thing every time. So, although language models are probabilistic, meaning that your output is not going to be the exact same thing every time, when you tune them with when you give them a low temperature, which I'll explain after this, they tend to be lazy. And if you give them the same ingredients, they'll give you the same recipe with slightly different wording. And without intervention, it's going to lead to a boring website that, is not going to be something that's interesting. So I sort of have an example, and this is actually something that happened, where every day, it would give what looks like a different meal, but it's actually the same. So if you read these, the titles look like they're different titles, but it's actually the exact same meal. So like banana cantaloupe skewers with honey drizzle, honey glazed banana and melon sticks, fruit skewers, banana, cantaloupe, and honey. It's the exact same meal. So like it's trying, it's almost like it's like, oh, it's a different meal, it's a different name. No. AI, little AI, it's the exact same meal. So if you don't go to intervene here, um, it's gonna give you the same boring recipe. And I'm not gonna get into the fine details about how I fix this, but you can imagine that modern language models, especially Google's models, have million plus token context windows. So you can fit a lot in there. And you can also pair that with things like RAG, where you embed the recipes that it's made already in a vector embedding, and then it makes it really easy for the models to go search it. But this is an interesting technical challenge that I didn't necessarily think about like when I initially built the site. So I talked about temperature a little bit. Temperature, as a refresher, is a variable that you can change when you interact with the language model. So temperature is a number that goes between 0 and 1, and it essentially dictates how creative the responses of the model are. So if you prompt in a language model and you give it a temperature of 1, it's going to be really, really creative with its outputs. If you give it a temperature of 0, it's going to be super, super predictable and almost like deterministic every single time. So for an example, if you're doing coding, you want it to have you always set it to 0 essentially for the temperature, because it's a very logical thing. You want it to just give you the right answer and the most logical outcome. Whereas when you want to make a recipe, you kind of do want a dash of creativity, but not too much, because if you give a temperature that's too high, it'll drift into chaos. So if you give a temperature of 1, you'll get recipes like peanut butter and clam chowder. So super creative, I'll give it that, but that's a gross recipe and nobody's gonna want to make that. If you have it too low, you're gonna get boring, repeated recipes every single day. Turkey sandwiches all day, every day. Works for some people, but doesn't really work for, my vision for what the site wants to be. Um, Another one is product inconsistencies in images. I'm just going to read this one verbatim. So in the case where recipes are created using already processed products, so cookies, like these cookies on the bottom are an example, the image that it generates of the final recipe is not always going to show the cookie the way it actually works. And the reason that this is because the language model already knows, what a banana looks like. It knows what an orange looks like. What it doesn't know is what this specific product looks like in the package. Breakfast cinnamon brown sugar biscuits. It sees brown sugar and it's thinking like cinnamon bun. And this is an example of something that actually happened. It made this breakfast like peach skillet thing with marshmallows. And it used this as one of the ingredients. But, I looked at the picture and I looked at the box and I said, okay, well, it clearly doesn't understand what this biscuit actually looks like. And I had to go in and intervene a little bit. So the reason that this is happening is because you're essentially like getting rid of the information about what the product actually looks like at that stage. So this is, the flow of data to get the image at the end. You have the flyer data, which is essentially just text. And then you feed that into the language model and you lose the information about what the actual product looks like right at that first stage. Now you can imagine building something that goes in and fixes this, where you identify if the product that's being used in the recipe is already processed. If it's a processed item like this biscuit, you would then feed the image of that into the image model for context right before it makes the image, and then that would probably fix it. But a bit of kind of a weird nuanced thing that you don't really, I didn't necessarily think of, when I started this. I'm gonna take a little sip of water here. So that's, done with the technical challenges. I'm gonna go on to a bit of AI advice here. So I've been using AI a lot, directly building it into the site, but also using it at my work and just using it to help me do, work in general. It's a super powerful thing, but it also kind of has some caveats. So specifically when you code with AI, it can sort of be like the poison chalice. So I got this picture here on the left. I liked it because it's got this little snake guy coming out of it. But it's the poison chalice in the sense that it's super tempting to look at it and say, oh my God, it's like it makes me so much more efficient. But there's serious risks when you just blindly use AI to generate code and try to especially trying to build a product that you want to maintain and you want to build on over time. Um, what I've set out here is sort of my steps for building with AI. Now, I've taken this slightly from Lex Friedman, but I've put my own spin on it, so it's mine, I think. So this is the general process. So you have your idea for what you want to build, right? You have an app or you have a website that you want to build. What you do is you take that idea and you go have a conversation with the language model and you get it to write you a very detailed description of your minimum viable product. So you cover all of your edge cases. You cover, how your UI UX design wants to look like, and you get this long, multi-page description of what you want to build. What you do then is you take that and you go to your generative coding system. So, it started with ChatGPT just like making individual methods for you. Maybe it would make the whole Python file for you. Nowadays, there are things like Cursor and Windsurf where the AI is built directly into your IDE, and you can literally just take that document with an empty repository and say, go review this, and build this for me. And, this is kind of like the miraculous part is that like it will actually just go build the whole thing for you. Um, After it's done, you have to, and this is probably the most important step of this entire process, is you really have to review and understand if what it produced is actually what you really want. Because what will happen is that if you don't do this, you will get to a point where it's working, but you'll get to a point down the road where um, you'll hit this essentially wall of bugs that you'll spend more time debugging it than if you were to just write it by hand yourself. So super, super critical step number two here. Once you've kind of got it finished, you run your tests and you debug it until it actually does what you want it to do. And then after that, you're kind of done. And then when you want to make changes, you make small, obvious changes manually because you know how the code base works. And then you give massive changes their own branch and you eventually merge them back into main. Codex is a cool product from OpenAI here. If you have a premium version of ChatGPT, you have access to this. It's a coding agent. There's command line interface for it, but there's also a web UI. Where essentially you can ask questions of your repository and you can have it draft up PRs for you. It's a really, really cool product. I encourage you to go check it out if you haven't. Now, vibe coding is sort of the negative connotation here. Vibe coding skips a lot of these critical steps. Vibe coding goes from you have an idea, you generate the code, and then you run tests and debug it until it actually works. You skip the vivid description that you use the language models to generate. So you skip probably a lot of edge cases that you didn't even think of. You're giving a really like poorly written description to your whatever coding agent you have. So it's going to misinterpret a lot of what you said. And that's actually your fault because you didn't explain it enough and you had this idea of how this thing was working, but you didn't write down explicitly all of the different edge cases. And then you go to step three where you run the test and you debug it until it actually works. Um, it skips the critical part of actually understanding how your system works in the first place. And what will happen is that you will face the massive wall of bugs that will, make you want to pull your hair out. And you'll get this little snake coming out of your golden chalice that eventually comes in and bites you. So this is sort of my general guideline of how to use AI to code. Another caveat here is that, it is really an adapt or die type of situation for software developers. It's so revolutionary and it's changed so much, within the past 4 years that if you don't adapt to it and you don't learn how to code effectively with AI, you'll fall behind. So super, super important to do, but it's even more important to figure out how to do it the right way. So language model, so that was, this is how to use AI to write code. if you want to build AI into your product or your service, LLMs tend to be cannibalistic. And what I mean by that is that when you implement a language model into your code base, typically it replaces a big chunk of your code base. So this is the example I gave, no particular reason. But let's say you're dealing with, all of the housing data in Canada, and you've got the section of your MLS listing that is the size of the property. All of the real estate agents in Canada haven't come to a conclusion and like haven't come to a big meeting where they're going to come up with one standard way for putting this information in. So all of your MLS listings are going to look slightly different. And this is a classic data cleaning problem. So you want to extract the number of acres from this field, but you have all of these different formats. Some people are putting it in square feet. Some people are, saying it's in a regular shape. Some people give you it in acres. You can imagine regular type 1 software where you have your clean size method and you're having to do things like, okay, like is the substring ft in the greater string, it means that they've probably given it in feet. Then you convert the square feet to acres. Is acres in it, you extract the number and you parse it that way. What you end up with is this massive conditional branching statement where it's very brittle, and it's still, this is going to break if you give it something like a regular shape. So if you want to use a language model to do something like this, it cannibalizes it in the sense that it gets rid of that entire method and it replaces it with this tiny method call, which is essentially convert whatever this text is into acres, and you feed in that string. And the same way that if you talk to a human who knew how to do unit conversion and you asked them to do this for you, they would understand they would understand, okay, a regular shape 0.8 acres. Okay, that's probably just 0.8 acres. 10,000 square feet, there's a standard way to convert that into acres. Me saying that LLMs can be cannibalistic sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like it's kind of got a negative connotation, but it's actually not. It can be a good thing in some cases where it's language models are much better at handling edge cases and being general, just in general. So, this case is one where it's actually super effective to use a language model. Now, it can be costly. If your LLM method there is an API call, that's going to cost a lot of money if you're cleaning something with a million, rows. But what you can do is increasingly you can use local language models to do this for you. And then it's just the cost of electricity. So um, just a kind of a note on, typically when you build in a language model to your software product, they tend to just replace a big chunk of code, but it's actually not a bad thing. It's kind of like an elegant thing in some cases. So in choosing an LLM provider, if you need frontier level intelligence, you have to go to an API. Most of us don't have a supercomputer in our house to run these frontier level models. Um, this is explicitly just from my experience building gatewaymealprep.com. There's lots of different metrics you can use, and I encourage you, if you're thinking about using an LLM provider, go do the research yourself, go figure out how much these cost per million tokens, go figure out, what the intelligence thresholds are. For Gateway Meal Prep, I've used different models for the various eras. Era 0 was me just feeding it into ChatGPT, so there's no images at all, and it's just the ChatGPT web interface. This is GPT 3.5 behind, like under the hood. Eras 1 to 2 was entirely OpenAI, so I was using DALL-E 3 for the images and GPT 3.5 Turbo for the language model. This is the one that had the kind of medieval looking cartoony pictures, so not great still. And it was expensive too. And then era sort of greater than 2 is Google. So I'm using Imagen 3.0 for the images and Gemini 2.5 Flash for the language model. I've sort of built out a very crude axis here where we have cost versus performance. What I've found is that typically OpenAI is costly and is performant, but not even necessarily as performant as the Google models for the most case. And then you kind of want to be in the bottom right-hand corner. You want to be low cost and high performance. Google seems to be there. That's what I'm using currently. We also have, I put a little circle for Olama. So this is local and you're running an open source model. Super cheap because you're running it locally, but also not super performant right now because you're forced to use a smaller model. But the thing is that circle is slowly, as you know, we develop more efficient models, that's slowly going to move towards the positive side of the performance axis. And eventually that'll be the best choice. So I'm waiting for that to happen. But this is sort of, and again, entirely my bias. This is what I experienced building this website. I encourage you to go check out, what these different model providers have to offer, essentially. I didn't even know if I wanted to show this, but I thought it'd be cool to talk about what an AI complete product is. So when you might have heard people talking about an AI complete product. What that means is essentially it's a product or service where AI is so deeply embedded into your offering, into what your product or service is, that as long as the models gets better, and by better I mean cheaper, smarter, and more efficient, that your product's going to get better. So Gateway Meal Prep is an example of this, where the smarter your model gets, the better your recipes are going to be, the tastier they're going to be, the more appealing they're going to be for people. There's sort of a plateau. If I threw a model that had 10 times more intelligence at gatewaymealprep.com, it wouldn't necessarily result in a 10 times better user experience because you only really need a certain level of intelligence to make these recipes. But you can imagine, if you had like an AI doctor or an AI lawyer or something, the smarter the underlying model is, the better that the outcome would be for the individual. So it's cool. It's interesting, now that the AI revolution has started, it's interesting to think about how you can build out an AI complete product that takes advantage of the increasing intelligence of these models as we move into the future. Few tips. So when you're using language models, they tend to be much better at positive instruction than negative instruction. So what I mean by this is that in the context of building recipes, a positive instruction is, give me a cake with vanilla icing. A negative instruction would be something like, give me a recipe for a cake, but don't have any strawberries in it. Now, for whatever reason, and I've got some intuition here to help explain, but I don't, know the exact reason why this is happening, but LLMs are typically much better when you give them positive instruction than negative instruction. It's almost like when if you tell somebody don't think about an elephant right now, what are they going to think about? They're going to, the image of an elephant is going to pop up into their mind. I think it's a similar thing with language models where, if you say give me a recipe for a cake with no strawberries in it, it sees the word strawberries in its context window. And it almost like can't help but think about it. And what happens is that because you've mentioned it, it can sometimes do the opposite of what you actually want it to do. So it's just a little tip when you're prompting a language model, try to, as much as you can, not to say, don't do this. Try to explicitly say, do this thing for me. And sometimes you can't get around it, but typically the negative instruction doesn't give you as good of a result as if you use positive instruction. So this kind of ties into the previous point. So this is explicitly when you're dealing with AI in your IDE. If you have an embedded coding agent in the place where you code, a really useful thing that I've found, and I find myself putting this at the end of most of my prompts, is like, when something is crashing, let's figure out exactly what's happening first. Don't write any code yet. Now, this is the same issue as before. There's a negative instruction in here. Don't write any code. Sometimes what will happen is that the AI will go and it'll search through your code base and it's almost like it's so confident that it knows what's going wrong that it ignores your request not to write any code, and it just gets so excited that it can't help and it goes and fixes whatever it thinks the issue is. But this is super useful. Kind of going back to step 2 of coding with AI, which is uh, your code base is only as good as is only as valuable as far as you understand it. So if you doing something like this forces the language model to explain what's going wrong, and it helps with your ability to understand the issues in your own code base, and it helps you with understanding what your code base actually does. And in the world of AI, we're dealing with increasingly complex and massive code bases. This really helps with driving home the understanding to the actual developer of what's actually going wrong. Um, yeah, but sometimes it does get carried away and it gets excited and it'll start fixing it for you. So, I mean, that's kind of the end of the session. In terms of a conclusion, Gateway Meal Prep as it stands is sort of, finished. It's at a state that, when I initially envisioned this, we're at that point now. It's people are using it. It's got these recipes that come out every single day. I wanted to include this plot. This is a plot from OpenAI, where they've essentially broken down what people use language models for. And it's broken down into the individual sections. So multimedia, practical guidance, seeking information, self-expression, technical help. You see a big chunk of that being computer programming. But what I see here is 1% of all of language model use goes to cooking and recipes. So that tells me that the dream is still alive. This is something that people are going to use. And, my bet is that AI is going to kind of be a big thing in the future. So that 1% market share is actually super valuable. So the dream is super alive. Although gatewaymealprep.com is finished, I still do think that there's huge potential for this, and I'm going to continue working on it. If you want to work with me on this, reach out. I've got my contact information here. If you're passionate and you want to help, building this type of thing, let me know and we can have a conversation about it. But that's basically it. Thank you, Brogan. Thank you, DeepSense, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Gateway, for supporting this, and thank you, Tamara, for being okay with this and letting me experiment with something that I wanted to kind of build and was passionate about. I've got my contact information here. You can scan this QR code and go to the website and check it out for yourself. I guess we'll take questions now.
Alyssa's asking what your favorite recipe is that you've made on the website.
Um, let's think about that. Uh, Here, one second. I'm gonna stop sharing. So it actually made one pretty recently that was really appealing. It made this this lemon. So what on sale this week at Gateway, there's berries. It's like cherries and blueberries and whatever for sale. So it's been using that a lot for the daily recipes. It made this like pie thing with lemon meringue filling with like berries on top, and it looks really appealing. And all of the ingredients were from Gateway too, which was cool. You'll see on the website that Gateway doesn't sell every single ingredient, so I have to go through and actually make sure that it says explicitly like which ones are from the store, which ones you have to go to other stores for. This one had every single ingredient from the store. Like it said to crush up these like graham cracker cookies to make the crust, and then it used like the lemon meringue stuff for the filling. Yeah, I think that one was up there for me.
That's pretty cool.
Let's see. Seems software development, there'll be a lot of grifting and overhype. What do you think separates a useful AI tool from grifts? Yeah, so that's a great question, Alex. There's it's tricky because you have to, if you want to build an AI product, you kind of in the back of your head have to think that OpenAI is going to is there's a potential that OpenAI is going to steamroll you and they're just going to build out that feature into their product and then it'll make whatever service you have obsolete. Now, I'm saying this because literally this morning, OpenAI released their first like official like marketing campaign for ChatGPT, and one of the videos was somebody like using it to generate recipes. So, there you have to think about like specific niches where it's like, is this something that like, is this a product that could only have been created in the past like 4 years? And which typically means that somebody hasn't gone and actually like gone full force in creating it. And work like if you know you'll have an idea and you'll just know whether or not it's good or bad, and it's useful to kind of ask a lot of people and get their ideas to see whether or not it's a good idea before you spend so much time. But you know, there is a lot like I guess Alex, the answer I would give is, you know, is it useful to you, and like is there like a large portion of people that it would be useful for? Because you know you can think of a lot of products that are just like, you know, gonna put AI in this for the sake of AI, and nobody's actually gonna be using it. Where you know, if you think about something novel, where you're using AI to do something that could only be possible in the past couple of years, that's probably something to look at. Um, Emily Burks, there are a certain set of skills or work experience you're looking for in a collaborator or something you're interested in working on the project with. So yeah, I mean, when you talk to somebody who's in computer science and who does this stuff, you can tell pretty quickly whether or not they're passionate about what they're doing, and that's probably the biggest thing. You know, your technical ability is one thing, and your raw intelligence is important too, but you know, what I would be looking for specifically in somebody to you know, help me out with this is, you know, do you have projects that you've worked on that isn't necessarily just for school? Like, do you go and work on stuff by yourself? And that's a great indicator of somebody who's passionate. And do you, you know, ability to work with AI and know what language models are capable of, is also a big thing. But you know, specifically for this project, you know, I'm more of a back-end developer. I don't really like the front-end stuff too much, which is great for AI because it can help me write HTML and CSS and all these things. So if you're, you know, you've got experience in cloud development or like DevOps type of thing, that would be something that I would be looking for. But if you know, if you're interested at all, reach out and we can have a you know, more in-depth conversation about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for taking the time out of your day to join us today.
We got another one. We got
Oh,
another
okay, perfect.
recruit. Would you prefer what would you prefer for running LLM? Keep it local, or you shifting to the cloud? I mean, recruit, you know me. I like things running locally. It's cheap, and you also have a lot more control over what you're doing. It depends on your use case. So if you need frontier level intelligence, you don't have any other option other than to go to the cloud. Um, it depends on your use case. If you're doing something like cleaning the data set example that I gave, you can do that with a local language model. It's a small enough, you know, narrow enough task that you can have something running locally, and it's also going to be way cheaper. But you know, for generating recipes, you know, maybe back in the day, you kind of do need the frontier level intelligence, so you have to go to the cloud. You have to go to an API provider for that. But it's a good question. There, it sort of depends on the use case, I guess, is the answer. Toby. Is there anything you wish you would have done differently to the gateway meal prep with all the experiments and errors you've been through? So, yeah, I mean, probably. You know, I have this idea where it would be cool to have more like user interactability, where like you can imagine that there's like a text field where you could go and generate your own recipe, and there's like a few that you could generate, like there's only 3 spots per day, so it's like first come first serve, where you could ask to make a recipe and it would like it would use what's on sale for from Gateway, and it would allow users to like make their own user generated recipes. I think that would be cool. That's a whole cloud thing though, so you know, that's more involved. But you know, I think that in building this, you know, I've been through like the failures, you learn kind of what you have to build in and like what you kind of have to do. So you're almost guided by your own failures there, where like a lot of the things that I have ended up implementing have just been out of necessity, where it's like it's not going to work unless I do this. So you know, in its current state, I don't think I would change anything in its current state. I'm happy with what it's currently at. But you know, there are lots of ideas that you could build out, and especially when it comes to, you know, using AI to help with food in general, right? Like you can imagine if you're celiac or if you're on a specific diet, you can pair that with knowing what's on sale at a grocery store and like finding out recipes that are going to be you know, cheap, That's there's definitely a lot of potential there. Good question, Toby. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any last questions? Okay, well, thanks again, Michael, and we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and experiences with us. And for everyone listening, I just sent some links in the chat to our student pool and also our social media accounts. And if you enjoyed today's discovery session, we'll be recording it and putting it up on YouTube. And there's also recordings of our past discovery sessions as well. So you can access them through the link in the chat. And make sure to keep an eye out for more discovery sessions and events from us in the coming months. So before we wrap up, Michael, do you have any last words or anything?
I mean, I think that's it. Go check out the website. Maybe actually, if you don't mind, let me drop it in the chat here.
Yeah, absolutely.
That should be the right one. There's no hyperlink, but you know how people know how to copy and paste. Yeah, check it out. Let me know. Reach out to me if you want to collaborate. Reach out to me if you have ideas for this. If you have ideas of how to make it better. Yeah, that's basically it. Thank you so much, Brogan, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, DeepSense. Thank you, Gateway. Yeah, really happy with everything so far.
Amazing. Well, thanks again, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you at the next discovery session.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.